Mercy had everything she once prayed for, but peace was not one of them. She had settled into life in the Okonkwo mansion, built a name for herself through her charity, and earned the admiration of society. Yet, every time she entered the dining room and felt Sandra's cold stare from across the table, she was reminded that she was still a guest in some people's eyes. Chief Okonkwo was the only one who never made her feel like an outsider. "Mercy is the daughter I always dreamed of," he would say proudly whenever friends visited. "Look what she has done for the less privileged. That is what it means to carry the Okonkwo name." Mercy would smile politely, grateful but slightly embarrassed by the praise. Her charity had grown rapidly under Chief Okonkwo's support. She sponsored school children, fed widows, and raised funds for families who had nothing. Reporters came to interview her. Newspapers published her story, and the public called her the girl with the golden heart. But Sandra didn't see a golden heart. She saw a threat. It was becoming harder for her to hide her resentment. Mercy's name was everywhere. Mercy's face was in the papers. Mercy was the one their father spoke of with pride. One evening, Sandra slammed her phone on her bed and stormed into her stepmother's room, who had later been released after Sandra and Mercy's intervention. "Mummy, I am tired of this girl," she said, her voice shaking with anger. "Everywhere I go, people talk about Mercy like she is the star of this family. I am the real daughter, not her." Mrs. Okonkwo put down her wine glass and looked at Sandra. "Calm down," she said softly. "Your father is just carried away. These things happen when men are feeling old and sentimental. Don't let it get to you." But when Sandra left, Mrs. Okonkwo's face hardened. She had seen how Chief Okonkwo's eyes lit up whenever Mercy walked into the room. She had seen how he defended her whenever Sandra complained. And she knew what it meant. If things continued this way, Mercy would soon hold more power in this family than Sandra ever did. Mrs. Okonkwo made a call that night. "I want you to follow her," she told the private investigator on the other end of the line. "Everywhere she goes, every person she meets. I want to know who she really is." The investigator got to work immediately, tailing Mercy day and night. But Mercy lived cleanly. Week after week, the reports came back with nothing scandalous. Just trips to the charity office, visits to orphanages, meetings with donors, and her weekly visits to her mother. "She's spotless," the investigator finally told Mrs. Okonkwo. "If you're looking for dirt, there's nothing to find." Mrs. Okonkwo's lips tightened. "Nobody is that perfect," she said under her breath. "She will make a mistake one day, and when she does, I will be waiting." Mercy, unaware of the trap being set around her, continued to live simply. Every week, she visited her mother at the modest house she had rented for her. "Mama, you should have seen Sandra today," Mercy said one afternoon as they cooked together. "She didn't say a word to me at dinner. Not one word." Her mother, gentle-faced woman with weary but loving eyes, put a hand on her shoulder. "Give her time, Mercy. It is not easy to share a father's love. One day she will see that you are not her enemy." Mercy nodded, though she wasn't sure she believed it anymore. The mansion no longer felt warm. Sandra's silences had grown colder, Mrs. Okonkwo's smile sharper. Even the house staff seemed nervous, as though they could feel the tension too. Mercy had worked so hard to earn her place in this family, but something told her it was only a matter of time before that place was challenged. And she was. The night was meant to be one of celebration. The charity hall glittered with lights. Guests in fine clothes applauded as Mercy stepped onto the stage to speak. Chief Okonkwo stood proudly in the front row, his face glowing as he watched her. But midway through her speech, everything changed. Chief Okonkwo's smile faded. His hand went to his chest, and before anyone could react, he collapsed. The hall erupted into chaos. Mercy's voice was the first to cut through the panic. "Call an ambulance," she shouted as she knelt beside him. Sandra rushed forward, her face drained of color. Guests whispered, staff scrambled, and within minutes, Chief Okonkwo was carried out on a stretcher, sirens wailing into the night. At the hospital, the air was thick with fear. Mercy could barely sit still, pacing the cold tiles of the waiting area, whispering prayers under her breath. Sandra sat rigidly in a corner, her arms folded, refusing to cry. Mrs. Okonkwo stood near the window, her hands clasped tightly, her usual composure slipping. When the doctor finally appeared, everyone rose to their feet. "Chief Okonkwo has lost a lot of blood," he said gravely. "He needs an urgent transfusion." Mercy volunteered immediately. Sandra followed, insisting she should be the first to be tested. The two women waited in tense silence until the results came back. The doctor's expression was unreadable as he delivered the news. Neither of them was a match. Sandra's frown deepened. "That's not possible," she said, her voice sharp. "I am his daughter." The doctor hesitated before speaking again. "To proceed safely, we must be sure of his medical history. We recommend a DNA test. It will confirm paternity and guide us toward the best treatment." It felt as though the room tilted. Sandra went very still. Mrs. Okonkwo turned sharply toward the doctor, shock on her face. She had entered this family after Sandra's mother passed. Even she did not know what this test might reveal. The test was done quickly, but the wait felt endless. Hours stretched like days. Mercy sat quietly, her hands clasped so tightly they hurt. Sandra refused to look at anyone. Mrs. Okonkwo barely spoke, pacing the corridor like someone trying to outrun her thoughts. When the results arrived, the truth landed like a blow. Sandra was not Chief Okonkwo's biological daughter. Sandra's breath caught. She turned her face away, but the tears came anyway, silent and hot. Mercy's chest ached as she watched her. Mrs. Okonkwo sank into a chair, her expression hollow, not angry, just stunned, as though someone had stolen the floor from beneath her feet. When Chief Okonkwo woke later that evening, the doctor explained everything gently. He said nothing at first, just stared at the ceiling, the lines on his face deepening with every passing second. When he finally spoke, his voice was hoarse but steady. "My late wife kept this from me all these years," he said. "But I will find out what happened the day Sandra was born. I owe her that much, and I owe myself the truth." Just before dawn, news came that an external donor had been found, a perfect match. The transfusion was done immediately, and Chief Okonkwo's condition began to stabilize. But the relief was muted. Sandra walked out of the hospital like a ghost, her shoulders stiff, her face unreadable. Mrs. Okonkwo said nothing during the drive home, and Mercy, though grateful that Chief Okonkwo had survived, could not shake the feeling that the ground beneath the Okonkwo mansion had shifted forever. Something had been uncovered, something that could not be buried again. Chief Okonkwo lay in his hospital bed long after visiting hours were over, staring at the white ceiling as though it held the answers he was desperate to find. The revelation that Sandra, the girl he had raised, protected, and groomed to inherit his empire, was not his biological child had struck him like a blow to the chest. The monitors by his bedside beeped steadily, but inside, his heart raced with questions that refused to rest. The next morning, against the advice of his doctors, he arranged for a private investigator. His body was weak, but his will was iron. Over the next few days, the man quietly dug through dusty hospital records from 25 years ago, tracing every file, every logbook that mentioned his late wife's name. Chief Okonkwo did not share this mission with anyone, not with Mrs. Okonkwo, not with Sandra, not even with Mercy. This was his burden to bear. His investigation led him first to a retired hospital administrator, then to faded records stored in a forgotten archive room. Piece by piece, the night of Sandra's birth began to take shape. One name kept appearing on the paperwork, Nurse Kim. She had been the one on duty that night. Tracking her down was not easy. She was now a frail old woman living quietly on the edge of town. When Chief Okonkwo finally sat across from her in her dimly lit sitting room, the weight of the years seemed to settle on her shoulders. Nurse Kim trembled as she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. The truth spilled out in fragments, each word a dagger. His real baby had died within hours of being born. His late wife, terrified that he would abandon her, had begged and bribed the nurse to find a replacement. And Kim had done the unthinkable. She had bought a baby from a poor woman who had delivered twins in the same ward. Chief Okonkwo sat frozen. The ticking of the old wall clock became unbearably loud. He could see his wife's face in his mind, hear her laughter, remember her fierce love, and yet this was the secret she had carried to her grave. He returned to his car in silence, but the fire inside him only grew hotter. He could not stop here. He had to know who that poor woman was, the one whose baby had been sold to him without his knowledge. After another week of searching, his investigator brought him to a small house in a quiet part of town. There, sitting on a wooden stool outside, was a dark-skinned woman with kind, tired eyes. When she looked up and recognized Chief Okonkwo, Her face crumpled. It was Mercy's mother. Inside her modest living room, she told her side of the story. She had been young, desperate, and alone when she delivered her twins. Poverty had cornered her. When Nurse and Kim approached her with an offer of money for one of the babies, she had agreed, believing it would give the child a better chance at life. Chief Okonkwo listened in silence, every word piercing him deeper. He thought of Sandra's laughter, her tantrums, the first time she had called him Papa. He thought of Mercy, who had grown up in hardship when she could have grown up under his roof. He buried his face in his hands and wept, not just for the child he had lost, but for the man he might have been if he had known the truth earlier. That night, back in his hospital bed, Chief Okonkwo lay awake until dawn. His body was weak, but his mind was on fire. The truth was his now, and it would change everything. Mrs. Okonkwo had been waiting for this moment. For months, she had watched Mercy grow in influence, watched Chief Okonkwo beam with pride at every charity award she won, watched Sandra shrink into the background. But now, the truth had given her the weapon she needed. She did not hesitate. Within days of the DNA results, she called a press conference, inviting the biggest media houses in the city. When the cameras began rolling, she stepped forward with the calm dignity of a woman who believed she was protecting her family's name. "It is true," she said, her voice measured, her posture straight. "Neither Sandra nor Mercy carries Chief Okonkwo's blood. As painful as this is, we must protect the Okonkwo legacy. These girls have no rightful claim to the inheritance. This fortune belongs to the true descendants of the Okonkwo lineage, and there are none left." Her words hit like thunder. The story spread faster than wildfire. By evening, headlines screamed across television screens and social media timelines. Okonkwo heiress not his real daughter. Family fortune in question. The family name, once a symbol of pride and influence, became the subject of gossip. Talk show hosts debated whether Chief Okonkwo had been hiding the truth all along. Commentators speculated about who would inherit the fortune now that the heir was disqualified. Overnight, the Okonkwo mansion became a symbol of scandal. Sandra felt the humiliation in her bones. For years, she had flaunted her father's name, used it to gain access to the most exclusive clubs, to command respect everywhere she went. Now, strangers on the internet called her a fraud. Memes of her old appearances were circulating with captions like, "Not even his blood." She locked herself in her room for 3 days. The curtains stayed drawn, her food trays remained untouched. On the 4th day, the sound of glass breaking echoed through the hallway. When the house staff finally peeked in, they found family portraits smashed on the floor, Sandra sitting in the middle of the mess, staring blankly at nothing. Mercy, meanwhile, chose silence. She did not defend herself, did not issue any statement. Her focus was on her mother, who was now a shadow of herself. The older woman wept often, blaming herself for everything that had happened. "If I had not taken that money, if I had not given one of my babies away," she said one evening, clutching Mercy's hands. Mercy only held her, whispering softly that the past could not be changed. She was not interested in fighting for a place in the mansion, not while her mother's heart was breaking all over again. Chief Okonkwo bore the weight of the scandal in silence. He no longer attended meetings or spoke to his friends. He stayed locked in his study, curtains drawn, newspapers scattered on the floor. Sometimes, the staff would hear him pacing in the middle of the night. Other times, they would find him sitting for hours, staring at an old photograph of Sandra as a child, the girl he had loved as his own, the girl who no longer knew where she belonged. The mansion itself seemed to mourn. The once lively house was now a place of whispers and shut doors. Meals were taken separately. Laughter had vanished from the halls. Even the staff walked more quietly, as though afraid to disturb the heavy silence. It was as if the heart of the family had stopped beating. The Okonkwo household, once feared, admired, and envied, now stood on the edge of collapse. The mansion stayed quiet for days after the scandal broke, too quiet. Then one morning, the silence was interrupted by the sound of Chief Okonkwo's voice calling everyone to the main sitting room. His tone was calm but firm, leaving no room for argument. When Sandra walked in, she found the lawyers already seated, their briefcases on the table. Mercy stood near the window with her mother by her side, her face calm but unreadable. Mrs. Okonkwo entered last, her expression sharp, as if ready for a fight. Chief Okonkwo looked different. The man who had been locked away in his study for days now stood tall, dressed in a simple white kaftan, his presence commanding the room. For a long moment, he said nothing, letting the weight of the moment settle over them all. Finally, his gaze turned to Mercy's mother. "You were there at the beginning of all this," he said gently, "before any of us knew the truth. Speak." Mercy's mother stepped forward slowly, her hands trembling. Tears had already begun to stream down her cheeks. "I was poor, so poor I could not feed the 2 babies I had just brought into the world," she said in a voice thick with guilt. "When they offered me money to take one of them away, I told myself it was mercy, that at least one would survive, that maybe the one I sold would have a better life. But I have carried that sin every day since. I am sorry, Chief. I am sorry to both of you." Sandra shifted uncomfortably, her jaw tight. Mercy reached for her mother's hand, squeezing it gently as if to say she had already forgiven her. Chief Okonkwo's eyes softened. He turned to face them all, and when he spoke, his voice carried the quiet authority of a man who had made up his mind. "I have spent too long grieving what I lost, the child who never took a breath, the years wasted living a lie. But today, I have decided that grief will no longer rule this house." He paused, looking first at Mercy, then at Sandra. "Blood may not have made us a family," he said slowly, "but love has. You may not carry my name by birth, but you have carried my heart. From this day forward, I will not allow anyone, not even this house, to tell you that you do not belong." The lawyers opened their folders and began reading the documents. Chief Okonkwo had signed papers legally adopting both Mercy and Sandra as his daughters and amending his will to make them joint heirs. Then came the part no one expected. "I can no longer share a roof with someone who turned this family's pain into a spectacle," Chief Okonkwo said quietly. His gaze landed on Mrs. Okonkwo. "This marriage is over." The words dropped like a hammer. Mrs. Okonkwo's eyes widened, but she said nothing. Her lips tightened into a thin line as she rose to her feet, straightened her wrapper, and walked out of the room without a word. The door shut behind her with a soft finality that seemed to lift a heavy shadow from the room. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Sandra's composure cracked. All the bitterness, all the humiliation, all the questions came spilling out of her in sobs. "I didn't ask for any of this," she cried, her voice shaking. "I didn't ask to be bought, to be lied to be turned into a headline." Chief Okonkwo crossed the room and placed a hand on her shoulder. "But you were chosen," he said softly, "and you are still being chosen. That is what matters now." Sandra wept like a child. When she finally quieted, she turned to Mercy, and, for the first time, there was no resentment in her eyes, only exhaustion and a fragile kind of acceptance. A few days later, Mercy invited Sandra to visit the neighborhood where it had all begun. The streets were narrow, the houses small, the smell of dust and fried akara filling the air. Sandra stood in front of the tiny house where Mercy had lived, the house she had never known, and for a long moment, she said nothing. Then she turned to Mercy, her voice low. "This could have been my life," she said. "Any of it could have been my life." Mercy reached out and took her hand, her eyes shining with tears. For the first time since the scandal broke, Sandra smiled. A small, tired smile, but a real one. And there, in that dusty street, the two of them stood together, not bound by blood, but by truth, forgiveness, and a choice to begin again. The mansion might never feel the same. The family name might never carry the same power, but in that moment, they had something better, a new kind of family.